The handcuffs
anything!
cut into
Stop
Maya
resisting!
Johnson's wrists as Officer Derek Foster slammed her face first against the hood of his patrol car in the parking lot of a Target in suburban Atlanta, Georgia. Her body pressed so hard against the hot metal that she could feel it burning through her thin t-shirt, while his partner, Officer Ryan Blake, yanked her arms behind her back with enough force to make her shoulders scream in pain. And the small crowd of Saturday afternoon shoppers gathering with their phones out to record weren't hearing her calm requests for them to check her credentials, weren't listening when she said there had been a mistake, because all they saw was what Derek Foster wanted them to see: a black woman in ripped jeans and a hoodie being arrested. And his voice boomed loud enough for every camera to catch it when he shouted, "Stop resisting," even though Maya hadn't moved a muscle beyond breathing. The call had come in 20 minutes earlier about a woman matching her description shoplifting electronics, a description so vague it could have fit 10,000 women in Atlanta. But Derek had spotted Maya walking to her car with a Best Buy bag and decided he'd found his suspect, his gut telling him what his gut always told him when he saw a young black woman in this neighborhood: that she didn't belong here, that she must have done something wrong, that his assumptions were probable cause enough. What Derek Foster didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know as he pressed his knee into Maya's back while she lay against the scorching hood, was that the woman he was brutalizing was Special Agent Maya Johnson of the FBI. And this mistake, this moment of racist assumption and excessive force caught on a dozen cell phone cameras, was about to cost him everything and expose a network of corruption that reached all the way to the Atlanta Police Department's highest ranks. Maya's training kicked in immediately, the thousands of hours at Quantico teaching her to stay calm under pressure, to control her breathing, to assess the tactical situation even while being assaulted. And she made the calculation in seconds that revealing her identity right now, in this moment of escalating aggression with an officer whose ego was already committed to this arrest, would only make things more dangerous for everyone involved. She could feel Derek's hand on the back of her neck, pressing her cheek against metal hot enough to burn, could hear Ryan reading her Miranda rights in a bored monotone that suggested he'd done this so many times the words had lost all meaning, could see in her peripheral vision at least 15 people recording, their phones held high to capture every second of what they assumed was just another case of police harassment, what some of them probably thought she deserved, what others recognized as the kind of racial profiling that happened every day in neighborhoods where black and brown people were always suspects first and citizens second. She didn't fight, didn't argue, didn't give them any excuse to escalate further, because she knew that women who looked like her died in situations like this when officers felt threatened or disrespected, when their authority was questioned, when they decided that
I'm so
compliance
sorry.
wasn't
This was a
happening
terrible
fast enough for their
mistake.
liking. Derek hauled Maya up from the hood and spun her around roughly, his face inches from hers, his breath smelling of coffee and the kind of arrogance that came from years of unchecked power. "You want to tell me what you stole, or are we going to find out when we search your car?" he asked, his tone making it clear he'd already decided she was guilty, that the trial was over before it began, that her guilt was written in her skin color and her zip code, and the fact that she was in a Target parking lot in Buckhead where he'd apparently decided she had no right to be. Maya's eyes, calm and steady in a way that made Derek uncomfortable though he couldn't articulate why, met his without flinching. "Officer, I haven't stolen anything. I purchased these items with my credit card. The receipt is in the bag. If you check your dispatch, you'll see the suspect description doesn't actually match me beyond the most basic demographic information." Her voice was level, professional, carrying none of the fear or anger that Derek was used to hearing, none of the reactions that usually confirmed his biases, and that calm somehow made him angrier, made him feel like she was challenging him, disrespecting him, not showing proper deference to his authority. Ryan was already searching Maya's car without consent, without a warrant, tossing her belongings onto the asphalt with casual disregard for her property rights or the Fourth Amendment, pulling out her gym bag and dumping its contents, her workout clothes and towel scattering across the parking lot while shoppers watched and recorded. He found her laptop bag and unzipped it, rifling through files and electronics with rough hands, and Maya's jaw tightened imperceptibly because that bag contained sensitive materials related to her actual case, encrypted and protected but still materials she didn't want contaminated by this circus. Derek saw her reaction, misread it as guilt, and smiled with satisfaction. What's in the computer, sweetheart? Stolen credit card numbers, identity theft, you running some kind of scam. His assumptions were piling up like a prosecution's case built entirely on prejudice, each one more insulting than the last, each one revealing exactly the kind of officer he was, the kind who saw crime in black faces and innocence in white ones, who policed based on appearance rather than evidence, who had probably ruined countless lives with arrests built on nothing more than his biases and his badge. The store manager arrived, a nervous white woman in her 50s named Patricia who'd called the police in the first place, though even she looked uncertain now about whether she'd done the right thing, her face flushed with the discomfort of someone realizing their snap judgment might have been wrong. Derek turned to her with the confidence of someone who'd never faced consequences for being wrong before. "Is this the woman you saw shoplifting?" Patricia looked at Maya, really looked at her for the first time, and something in her expression shifted. I don't know. I saw someone on the security cameras, but it was from a distance, and I just assumed." She trailed off, her assumptions laid bare, the casual racism of seeing a black woman with shopping bags and immediately thinking theft rather than legitimate purchase. Derek wasn't interested in her doubts. "Did you or didn't you see someone stealing electronics?" Patricia nodded weakly. "Yes, but I'm not sure it was her. The person on the camera had different clothes, I think, and maybe different hair," and Derek cut her off. "We'll sort it out at the station. I'm sure when we run her record, we'll find plenty to justify this stop." Maya knew what was coming next, had studied the statistics and the patterns, knew that Derek would run her name and find nothing because she didn't have a record, and that the nothing would somehow not be enough to make him apologize or admit his mistake, that he'd double down or find some other charge to justify what he'd already done, resisting arrest perhaps, or disorderly conduct, some catch-all charge that cops used when they needed to prove they'd been right to brutalize someone. She was proved correct when Ryan returned from running her license, his face showing confusion. "She's clean. No warrants, no record, not even a parking ticket." Derek's jaw clenched, his narrative collapsing but his ego refusing to let him back down. "Then this is her first time getting caught. Search her more thoroughly." Ryan hesitated, glancing at the crowd of recording phones, perhaps recognizing that they were on dangerous ground, that this was starting to look very bad, that the optics of two white cops aggressively searching a black woman who appeared to be innocent were exactly the kind of thing that sparked protests and investigations. But Derek was already moving forward, reaching for Maya's pockets, and that's when she made her decision, calculating that the risk of letting this continue outweighed the risk of revealing her identity, that Derek's escalating aggression suggested he was the kind of officer who might plant evidence or create charges out of thin air, that she needed to end this before it spiraled into something even more dangerous. "Officer Foster," she said, her voice carrying a new tone, one of authority rather than compliance, one that made Derek pause mid-reach. "I'm going to need you to stop right now and call your supervisor. I am Special Agent Maya Johnson, Federal Bureau of Investigation, and you are currently interfering with an ongoing federal investigation." The words hung in the hot Atlanta air, and for a moment everything froze, the crowd stopped murmuring, Ryan's hand went to his radio instinctively, and Derek's face cycled through disbelief, anger, and the first cold finger of fear. Derek laughed, but it was forced, brittle, the laugh of someone trying to convince himself he hadn't just made a catastrophic mistake. "Right, and I'm the president. You got any ID to back up that fantasy?" Maya's eyes, which had been calm before, now carried something harder, something that made even Derek take an unconscious step back. "My credentials are in my wallet, which is in my back pocket. which you can retrieve carefully and examine. Or you can call the FBI field office in Atlanta and ask for Special Agent in Charge Robert Martinez, who will confirm my identity and probably arrive here in about 15 minutes, extremely interested in why two APD officers are currently assaulting one of his agents. Ryan had already pulled out his phone, was already dialing, his survival instincts better than Derek's, his recognition of how badly this could go finally overriding his partner's stubbornness. Derek snatched Maya's wallet, flipped it open, and his face went absolutely white as he stared at the FBI credentials, the gold badge, the official identification that proved everything she just said was true. The mistake Derek Foster made in that Target parking lot would eventually cost the Atlanta Police Department $47 million in federal oversight, cost Derek and Ryan their badges and their pensions, and cost 6 other officers their freedom when the corruption investigation Maya had been working on for 8 months finally had the public pressure it needed to move forward. But none of that was visible yet in that moment when Derek was staring at FBI credentials that proved he just handcuffed, brutalized, and illegally searched a federal agent. Ryan was on the phone, his face growing paler by the second as whoever he was speaking to apparently confirmed Maya's identity and probably used language that wasn't appropriate for the crowd of shoppers still recording. Derek's hands were shaking now, trembling as he held the credentials, his brain finally catching up to the magnitude of what he'd done, how many laws he'd broken, how many of those cell phone videos were about to ruin his life. We got a call about a shoplifter. We were just responding to, Maya cut him off, her voice cold as ice. You were responding to a vague description of a black woman and decided I fit it because of my skin color, not because of any actual evidence. You assaulted me without cause, searched my vehicle without consent or probable cause, and violated about 6 different constitutional rights in the process, all while being recorded by multiple witnesses. But to understand how Special Agent Maya Johnson ended up handcuffed in a Target parking lot being brutalized by the kind of cops she'd spent her career fighting against, you had to go back 8 months to a windowless conference room in the FBI's Atlanta field office, where Special Agent in Charge Robert Martinez had presented her with a case that would define her career. Maya had been with the Bureau for 7 years, had built a reputation as someone who could go deep undercover, who could blend into communities and gather intelligence without being made, who had the kind of face that people underestimated, which was both a curse in her daily life and a weapon in her professional one. The case Martinez presented was a civil rights investigation into the Atlanta Police Department's Zone 3 precinct, where an unusual number of excessive force complaints, false arrests, and civil rights violations had been reported over the past 3 years, almost exclusively involving Black and Hispanic residents of the surrounding neighborhoods. The pattern was clear to anyone looking at the data. Certain officers were operating with impunity, targeting minority communities, making arrests that didn't lead to convictions, using force that was never deemed justified but never quite provoked enough outrage to spark real consequences. Maya's job was to go undercover in the community, build relationships, document the pattern of abuse, and most importantly, find out if this was just bad policing or something more organized, more corrupt, more criminal. She'd spent 8 months living in an apartment in the neighborhood, working at a community center, becoming part of the fabric of a community that had learned not to trust police, that had stories of sons and daughters and fathers and mothers who'd been beaten or arrested or humiliated for crimes they didn't commit, for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, for having the wrong skin color in neighborhoods where officers like Derek Foster had decided who belonged and who didn't. Maya had documented 17 separate incidents of misconduct, had recorded conversations with officers who spoke openly about targeting problem demographics, who laughed about planting evidence, who shared tips on how to write reports that justified force even when force wasn't justified. She'd identified a ring of 6 officers, including Derek Foster and Ryan Blake, who were essentially running a protection racket, targeting businesses owned by immigrants and people of color, threatening them with excessive code enforcement and harassment unless they paid informal fees to make problems go away. It was corruption dressed up as policing, criminality hiding behind badges, exactly the kind of thing that destroyed communities and eroded trust in institutions that were supposed to serve and protect. Maya had been building her case methodically, gathering evidence that would be admissible in court, waiting for the right moment to emerge and bring the hammer down. That moment had just accelerated dramatically, and not in the way Maya had planned. Special Agent in Charge Martinez arrived in the Target parking lot exactly 14 minutes after Ryan's phone call, followed by 3 other FBI vehicles and an assistant U.S. attorney who'd been working the corruption case with Maya from the beginning. Martinez was a man in his 50s, built like a boxer, with gray hair and the kind of face that had seen too much but still believed in justice. And when he stepped out of his black SUV and saw Maya still in handcuffs, still being held by officers who now looked like they wanted the earth to swallow them whole, his face became a mask of controlled fury. "Take those cuffs off my agent right now," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of federal authority, the kind of tone that made it clear this was not a request, not a suggestion, but an order that would be followed, or there would be consequences that extended beyond anyone's career into potential criminal charges. Derek's hands fumbled with the key, his professional competence apparently deserting him along with his confidence, and when the cuffs finally came off, Maya rubbed her wrists where the metal had cut into her skin, dark marks that would photograph well in the civil rights complaint that was probably already being drafted. Martinez pulled her aside, his eyes scanning her for injuries, his concern genuine despite the professional context. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Maya nodded, though her shoulder still ached from Ryan's rough handling, though her cheek was red from being pressed against the hot car hood, though the humiliation of being treated like a criminal in front of dozens of witnesses was going to take longer to fade than any physical injury. "I'm fine, sir. But we need to move quickly. Foster and Blake just gave us everything we need for the civil rights case. Multiple witnesses, video evidence, clear constitutional violations, and they did it to a federal agent, which means we can bring federal charges that the local DA can't make disappear." Martinez's smile was grim, the expression of someone who'd been waiting for this moment, for the leverage that would crack open a case that had been moving too slowly through official channels, hampered by police unions and political pressure, and the general reluctance of the system to police itself. "Oh, we're going to do more than that. Every case these officers have been involved in for the past 5 years is now subject to review. Every arrest, every use of force report, every citation. The consent decree we've been negotiating with the city just got a lot less negotiable. And personally," he turned to look at Derek and Ryan, who were standing by their patrol car looking like they were attending their own funeral, "I'm going to enjoy watching these two explain to a federal judge why they thought it was appropriate to assault an FBI agent because she committed the crime of shopping while black." The assistant U.S. attorney, a sharp woman named Jennifer Chen who'd built her career on civil rights prosecutions, was already interviewing witnesses, collecting their contact information, asking them to preserve their video recordings, building a case that would be airtight, that would survive any defense attorney's attempts to dismiss or minimize what had happened. Patricia, the store manager, was crying now, apologizing to Maya repeatedly, as if saying sorry could undo her racist assumption, as if regret could erase the fact that her phone call had set this entire disaster in motion. Maya accepted the apology with grace she didn't quite feel, understanding that Patricia was a product of the same system that produced officers like Derek, the same system that taught people to see threats in black faces, the same system Maya had spent her entire career trying to dismantle piece by piece. The local news crews arrived within the hour, because of course they did, because a dozen people had already posted their videos to social media with hashtags about police brutality and FBI agents, because the story was too explosive to contain, too perfect in its irony. Two cops who thought they were arresting a shoplifter actually brutalizing a federal agent investigating them for brutality. Maya watched as Derek and Ryan were themselves placed in handcuffs, not arrested yet, but detained for questioning, their weapons and badges confiscated, their careers effectively over even before the formal charges were filed. She felt no satisfaction in their humiliation, no joy in their downfall, only a tired recognition that this was always how it had to end, that people like Derek never stopped until they were forced to stop, that the system protected them until the moment it couldn't anymore, and then it sacrificed them to protect itself. The press conference happened 3 days later, Special Agent in Charge Martinez standing at a podium with the FBI seal behind him, Maya at his side in her formal suit and credentials clearly visible, the bruises on her wrists faded but still photographable, the story already having dominated local and national news cycles for 72 hours straight. Martinez announced the indictment of 6 Atlanta Police Department officers on federal civil rights charges, including Derek Foster and Ryan Blake, announced the expansion of the investigation into the entire Zone 3 precinct, announced that the Department of Justice would be seeking a consent decree requiring federal oversight of the Atlanta PD, announced that every case involving the indicted officers would be reviewed for potential wrongful conviction. He announced that the catalyst for this federal intervention was the assault on Special Agent Maya Johnson, and he made it clear, in language that left no room for misinterpretation, that what happened to her in that Target parking lot was not an isolated incident, but a symptom of a systemic problem that had been poisoning the relationship between police and community for years. Maya spoke briefly, her statement carefully prepared but delivered with genuine emotion, about her 8 months undercover, about the stories she'd heard from residents who'd been terrorized by the officers who were supposed to protect them, about children who'd learned to fear police instead of trust them, about businesses that had been extorted, about young men who'd been beaten or arrested for the crime of existing in their own neighborhoods. She spoke about the Target parking lot incident not as something exceptional, but as something routine, as the kind of thing that happened to Black Americans every day, with the only difference being that she had credentials and backup, and the power to fight back in ways that most victims never would. She made it clear that this wasn't about her, wasn't about one bad day for one FBI agent, but about a pattern of abuse that destroyed lives and communities, and that the federal government was finally going to do something about it. The fallout was immense and immediate. The Atlanta police chief resigned within the week, unable to survive the scrutiny of having federal agents investigating his department for systematic civil rights violations. The mayor, who'd been denying there was any problem for years, suddenly discovered a passion for police reform and community relations, though everyone recognized it as the political survival instinct it was. Derek Foster and Ryan Blake were fired, arrested, and eventually sentenced to 4 and 3 years in federal prison respectively, their appeals denied, their careers and reputations destroyed. The other 4 officers involved in the corruption ring took plea deals in exchange for testimony about how deep the rot went, how many other officers knew or participated, how the system of informal protection and willful blindness had allowed this to continue for years. 17 people who'd been wrongfully convicted based on evidence from the corrupt officers were exonerated, their records cleared, though no amount of legal remedy could give them back the years they'd lost or the damage to their lives and families. The consent decree imposed on the Atlanta Police Department required sweeping reforms, mandatory bias training, use of force restrictions, body camera requirements, civilian oversight boards, and federal monitoring that would last for years. It cost the city millions in implementation and settlements, but more importantly, It began the slow process of rebuilding trust between police and the communities they served. Trust that had been shattered by officers like Derek Foster, who saw badges as weapons and authority as permission to abuse. Maya continued her work with the FBI, her face now too public for deep undercover operations, but her expertise valuable in training other agents, in consulting on civil rights cases across the country, in speaking to community groups about their rights and how to document police misconduct, in being a visible reminder that the system, however flawed, still had people fighting to make it better. The Target parking lot where it all happened became, strangely, a landmark of sorts, a place where community members would occasionally gather to mark anniversaries of the incident, to tell the story of the FBI agent who'd been handcuffed for shopping while Black and Hood turned that humiliation into justice for an entire community. The store manager Patricia left retail, haunted by her role in what happened, and became an advocate for anti-bias training in corporate America, trying to undo the assumptions she'd learned and passed on. The videos of Maya's arrest were used in police academies as examples of what not to do, how racial profiling and excessive force destroyed police credibility and opened departments to federal prosecution, how assumptions about crime and criminality based on skin color were not only morally wrong but legally catastrophic, how every interaction with the public was potentially being recorded and would be judged not by the officer's intentions but by their actions. Maya kept the torn t-shirt she'd been wearing that day, the one that had been burned by the hot car hood, the one that Derek Foster had pressed her against while accusing her of crimes she didn't commit. She kept it not as a trophy but as a reminder of how quickly things could go wrong, of how vulnerable everyone was to the assumptions and biases of people with power, of how her badge and her credentials had ultimately protected her in ways that ordinary citizens couldn't access, of how the fight for civil rights and police accountability was never finished, never won completely, but had to be fought continuously, case by case, incident by incident, one corrupt officer at a time. She thought about the thousands of people who'd experienced what she experienced in that parking lot, but without the FBI credentials to flash, without the special agent in charge rushing to their defense, without the media attention and the federal prosecution, just the humiliation and the bruises and the arrest record that would follow them forever. And she used that thought to fuel her work, to remind herself why this mattered, why every case mattered. Why justice delayed or denied for anyone was justice threatened for everyone. Years later, when Maya was promoted to special agent in charge of her own field office, when she stood in front of new recruits at Quantico teaching them about civil rights law and undercover operations, she would tell them the story of the Target parking lot, of the day she was handcuffed and searched and humiliated by officers who saw a criminal instead of a colleague, who saw skin color instead of a person. She would tell them that the badge they were about to earn came with immense power and immense responsibility, that they would have authority that could ruin lives or save them, that they would make split-second decisions with lasting consequences, that they would be tempted every day to take shortcuts, to make assumptions, to see what they expected to see instead of what was actually there. She would tell them that Derek Foster probably thought he was a good cop, that he probably told himself his instincts were right more often than they were wrong, that he probably rationalized his biases as experience, his prejudices as pattern recognition, his racism as realism, right up until the moment he handcuffed an FBI agent and destroyed his own life along with the lives of everyone who trusted him with authority. And she would tell them that the true measure of a law enforcement officer wasn't how they treated people who had power or credentials or the ability to fight back, but how they treated people who had none of those things, people who were vulnerable and afraid, and at the mercy of whoever wore the badge, because that was where character revealed itself. That was where the oath to serve and protect meant something or meant nothing. That was where you proved whether you believed in justice for all or just justice for some. The story of Maya Johnson, the FBI agent mistaken for a criminal, became more than just one incident or one case. It became a symbol of a larger struggle, a reminder that the work of building a just society was never finished. That progress was measured in small victories and painful lessons. That sometimes the people enforcing the law needed to be reminded that they weren't above it. And that every now and then, the person you underestimated, the person you dismissed based on appearance, the person you brutalized because you thought they couldn't fight back, turned out to be exactly the person who could bring everything crashing down around you, and maybe, just maybe, build something better from the rubble.